Hello, everyone, and welcome to Educational Psychology, where today's lecture we're going to be talking about student-centered and constructivist approaches to instruction, as well as learners with exceptionalities. This lecture is meant to emphasize some of the topics that are important, but it is not meant to replace your reading and other materials for this week. So let's start by talking about what is the constructivist view of learning. Well, constructivism is a theory that says that learners construct knowledge rather than just passively taking in the information. So as people experience the world and reflect upon those experiences, they build their own representations and incorporate new information into their pre-existing knowledge. So the constructivist view has its history rooted in the works of Piaget and Vygotsky. It incorporates ideas such as social learning, the zone of proximal development, cognitive apprenticeship, and mediated learning and scaffolding. So what are some constructivist approaches? Well, we could use top-down processing, where students begin with a complex set of problems and then discover the basic skills required to solve them. Peer interaction is another way that we can emphasize social nature of learning using groups and peers and cooperative learning as a way to approach novel situations. Discovery learning is where active student involvement, experimenting, discovering principles, and learning a process takes place. This arouses curiosity, motivates, and helps students to really want to find answers, as well as incorporates critical thinking. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. As well as self-regulated learning. This is learning that's independent, where students are motivated and they persist. Really, they're doing a lot of the learning on their own. And then scaffolding is another constructivist approach. This is where teachers provide structure or prompts, and then they gradually turn that responsibility over to the learner so that the learner has a basic understanding of what's being taught, but then they need to move into being more of an active learner. They're not just sitting there listening. They're continuing to learn and build upon the previous knowledge that they have. So let's watch a brief video about constructivism in education.
Constructivism is built on the principle of active learning. It argues that learners are not passive recipients of information. Rather, they construct their own understanding by actively engaging with the material. This engagement involves questioning, hypothesizing, and making connections to their own experiences, which allows them to develop a deeper and more personalized understanding of the topic. Another key tenet of constructivism is the emphasis on social interaction. In this theory, learning is not an isolated process. It's something that occurs in a social context through interaction with peers, teachers, or others in the environment. By discussing and debating ideas with others, learners can refine their own understandings and arrive at new insights. In a constructivist framework, the learner is at the center of the educational process. This means that learning activities should be relevant, meaningful, and engaging for each individual student. Teachers serve as facilitators, guiding learners to construct their own knowledge, rather than acting as the primary source of information. This is often achieved through problem-based learning, projects, and other student-directed activities. Constructivism values deep, conceptual understanding over rote learning or memorization. Constructivist learners seek to understand the underlying principles and concepts of what they're learning, not just the facts. By integrating new knowledge with their existing knowledge structures, learners can make sense of complex ideas and apply their learning in new contexts. Finally, reflective practice is a key component of constructivism. Reflection allows learners to review their learning experiences, evaluate their understanding, and plan their future learning strategies. By reflecting on their own thinking processes, learners can gain insights into their own learning, making them more effective and independent learners in the future. The most well-known framework for constructivism is Piaget's stage-based model. Piaget's stages are essential for any educator to know and understand. Watch this video below on Piaget's stages, and make sure you take notes on the 4 stages of cognitive development from Piaget's constructivist theory.
Now, we don't have to watch that video on Piaget at this time. It's something that I might add in later. But for now, that was just a video to emphasize some different ideas of constructivism in education, to see how it's utilized in various ways, and just to give you another look at what is constructivism in education, in case it's something that is new to you. So, one of the things that was touched upon in constructivism learning was the idea of cooperative learning methods and cooperative learning in education, meaning that students are not just sitting alone, passively taking in information, that they have another way of being able to work with the information that's being given or to explore new areas of information. So some of the ways of cooperative learning and some of the methods are working together in small groups, and that way they help each other learn. A lot of mixed feelings about that for some people, and we can talk a little bit more about that as well. Student teams achievement divisions, or STAD, 4-member teams. There's a master lesson with materials. They take a quiz and earn points. So this rewards a team rather than as well as individual effort, Then we have cooperative integrated reading and composition, CIRC. These are where teams engage in a series of activities and they develop comprehension and writing skills. And we also have the jigsaw method, where 6-member teams divide content to be learned. Each member learns a section and teaches it to the others in the group. So these are all different cooperative learning methods, and they're all useful for different ways of getting material to the students and having them actively use that material. Again, not just passively sitting and listening to it. They're either working together in a small group, or they're working together in a team, or they're working together to read something, or working together to teach one another novel concepts. Some other ideas in cooperative learning methods which have been utilized are learning together, where groups create a group product. Peer-assisted learning strategies, or PALSs. So in pairs, they take turns as teacher and learner. Cooperative scripting, where one student summarizes and the other listens and then corrects the errors, and then they switch roles. So you're going back and forth a little bit, like someone's being the teacher and the other person is kind of giving feedback or an edit. And then informal cooperative learning strategies, where numbered heads, think, pair, share, project-based learning, computer-supported collaborative learning, etc., are all different learning strategies in the informal cooperative strategies. So one of the things that I think is really important that we need to think about is when you're teaching a various and diverse group of students, what you're hoping to have students do, and I know that I've talked about this if you've ever taken one of my Intro to Psychology courses, is that I hope for each of you to learn how to be good students, meaning really to be good learners, be good researchers, because no matter what it is you do in this world, you are going to need to learn and figure out how to find information, and it's not always going to be right in front of you. So something that I think is a really important skill, and I know is important when we're talking about the various learning methods, is to discuss ways that students can solve problems. And one of those ways is a 5-step general problem-solving strategy called IDEAL, and it stands for the first letters, each letter of the word ideal, and how to go about solving this problem. So what's the process? How do you break it down? If you have a student and they're trying to solve some kind of a problem with whatever it is that they are looking to learn about, this is one of the methods that you can help them to break that down and be an active learner in their own education. So one, it starts by identifying problems and opportunities, and that's the I in ideal. And then D, define goals and represent the problem. E, explore possible strategies. A, anticipate outcomes and then act. And L, so you want to look back and you want to learn. So a great way to go about having students solve some of their own problems in a step-by-step strategy, the ideal strategy. Another important concept that we look at when we are talking about education, and that is the ability to critically think. And I think it is something that is underrated and possibly maybe not utilized enough until students get a little bit older, but I think even the younger students can really learn to critically think because it's an active learning process where you're not just regurgitating information. And for those of you who have looked at a lot of the questions that I ask and the assignments that I ask you to do, a lot of that goes back to critical thinking, where I'm not necessarily always asking you to repeat information back, but I'm asking you to think and to use that information. So what is critical thinking? Well, it's learning to make rational decisions about what to do or what to believe. For example, you can identify assumptions or fallacies in arguments, identify misleading advertisements, weigh competing evidence, and then it requires practice. So you can provide dilemmas to your students, logical and illogical arguments, valid and misleading ads, and so on. And it sets a classroom tone where you encourage acceptance of divergent perspectives and free discussion. So really the ability, like I said, to break down information, to identify, evaluate, see what do you believe, what do you not believe? Are there fallacies in this argument? Are there things that are factually inaccurate in your argument? So when you identify misleading advertisements, or I ask you to, identify some assumptions or things that people have made about a specific topic, I'm really requiring and asking of you to look at dilemmas or look at a certain situation in a very different way, and then make your own arguments as to why you feel the way that you do. And then oftentimes I'll ask you to back that up with data. And again, critical thinking, a very important skill that we need to be teaching our students. And in this instance, so what is the intentional teacher then? So as you are going through and you're looking at this topic and you're saying, well, what is my constructivist approach to education? What am I doing? Am I student-centered, or am I someone, as I always joke around, I feel like I'd be a great lecturer because I am good at, I think, being able to articulate information and explain it. But then we need to make it more student-centered, where we are working with students and making sure that they have control of their information. So you're almost handing over the reins and saying, okay, I'm giving you some basic information and you're going to take it from here, and I'm here to support you along that way. So what you're hoping to do is you're hoping to structure activities in ways that enable students to learn using student-centered and constructivist methods, provide frequent opportunities to create, discover new knowledge, such as using projects and discussions or open-ended experiments. You also want to make extensive use of effective forms of cooperative learning with group goals and individual accountability. We all know that people don't like group goals or group projects when one person ends up taking the lead and everybody else gets to just be an inactive participant in the group, but yet they're still getting a lot of credit for it. We don't want that to happen. So use specific methods such as reciprocal teaching, the writing process, and inquiry in math and science. Teach broadly applicable problem-solving skills. And again, like I said, teach critical thinking skills that balance openness as well as skepticism. So moving beyond the student-centered and constructivist approaches to education, we're going to talk a little bit about learners with exceptionalities. So who are learners with exceptionalities? Well, these are individuals whose either physical, mental, or behavioral performance is higher or lower than the norm, and additional services in education and beyond might be required to meet their needs. And as you can see, I've listed some definitions when we're talking about exceptionalities that are used. Disability, a functional limitation a person has that interferes with their physical or cognitive abilities. A handicap, which is a condition imposed on a person with disabilities by society, the physical environment, or the person's attitude. So we try to use people first language. So we put people first, avoid making the person equal to their disability. So we'd say a child with a learning disability, not a learning disabled child. So if you can see the difference there, we are making sure that we are not making the person the disability, that we are talking about a child who happens to have a learning disability. So we have various types of exceptionalities that we're going to talk about, and I'm not going to ask you to look at all of the disabilities and memorize what they are and the percentage that they fall into, but I just wanted to give you a general idea here of the various disabilities and what percentage of children ages 3 to 21 receive special education services. So first, let's talk about students with intellectual disabilities. So this is characterized by significant limitations in both intellectual functioning as well as adaptive behavior. And adaptive behavior, we're talking about someone's ability to really function in the world and their environment. So the causes of students with intellectual disabilities, oftentimes genetics, chromosomal abnormalities, diseases, perhaps a mother's chemical dependency during pregnancy, and so many more. We can talk about environment, possible carcinogens in our world, in the air, in where we live and breathe. But some studies have shown that perhaps as many as 50% of cases could have been prevented in terms of having a child with an intellectual disability. It is constituted as someone that has an IQ at 70 or below. The level of severity is determined by the performance. And then categories of intensities of support, meaning do they need intermittent support, limited, extensive, or pervasive? Next, we're talking about students with learning disabilities. And characteristics of students with a learning disability include normal intelligence and even giftedness. But there's a discrepancy between that intelligence and how they're able to actually perform in the classroom. So for example, you might know if a student who, you know that they're really smart, they're very capable, they've scored really high perhaps on their intelligence tests or IQ tests that they've had to take, but they're not able to meet that level in the classroom. So it's kind of like there's a disconnect. What's going on there? It will oftentimes present as displays in achievement, perhaps hyperactivity or attention deficit, and perceptual anomalies and other characteristics are often at play. Sometimes these students have a lower academic self-esteem than students without a learning disability. And then overrepresentation of boys as well as African Americans, Latinos, and students from non-college educated families. So another disability that we would come in contact with would be students with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also called ADHD. And many of you who might be familiar with this, perhaps with yourself or a child that you have or someone that you've known, that this often presents itself as difficulties maintaining attention, not able to concentrate very easily, a lot of impulsive behaviors, and sometimes hyperactive. So these students do not qualify for special education unless they also have another disability or condition that's defined in the law as a special education disability. This is diagnosed in 9.4% of children ages 4 to 17, usually more males. However, we're seeing a lot more females as well who are being diagnosed with ADHD. And for this, medications are often prescribed. This can make the behavior more manageable and improve academic performance because what it does is it allows the student to not feel so impulsive, not act out on a lot of those impulsive thoughts, and their ability to concentrate oftentimes is improved. However, a lot of times with medications, there are side effects. So parents and children alike need to weigh and balance if this is something that, if it's a disorder enough where students could benefit from could benefit from medication in their educational environment. So when you do have a student with ADHD, one of the things that can be really helpful is to make sure that the students understand the rules and procedures. You can seat them to prevent distractions, perhaps closer to you, away from maybe noises in the hallway. Recognize they may not be able to control their behaviors necessarily, so giving a little bit of exception and grace if you know the student struggles with this. Provide opportunities for them to be active instead of a lot of long sitting time in the classroom. Perhaps you're having students get up and act out something that they're learning about. Minimize the use of punishment or threats to manage behavior. Try to teach self-monitoring and self-evaluation, self-reinforcement goals so that you're not the one who's always trying to reinforce behavior, but teaching the student to self-monitor. And then maintain ongoing communication with folks at home. Collaborate with your special education personnel on different strategies if you're finding difficulty making certain techniques work. So another type of issue that you might come across are students with speech or language impairments. So oftentimes you'll see students, they might have a speech disorder, which is commonly articulation problems. That is where they are speaking and they are having some type of a problem. Maybe they're omitting sound or distorting sound or substituting different sounds. This is diagnosed and treated by speech pathologists or therapists, and these are also found in the school districts as well as in private practice. And the teacher's role is really of acceptance and being patient and avoid pressuring students who are struggling with their speech or language impairment to feel more stressed, to feel more anxious. We really want to try to work with the student and make sure that we are giving them a supportive environment so that they can practice a lot of what they're learning when they are seeing their speech and language pathologist. So oftentimes there are some language disorders that we see where there are difficulty in actually understanding or comprehending language. Those are their receptive problems. And these are difficulties in communicating, and those would be called expressive. So we have receptive difficulties where you're actually understanding language, and then difficulty in communicating, that would be expressive language. And these may result from hearing or speech impairments or intellectual or learning disabilities. The next thing that you might find is you will come across students with emotional and behavioral disorders. And this is where educational performance is adversely affected in the long term. In order to be diagnosed as having emotional or behavioral disorders, the condition would be an unexplained ability to learn, an inability to build relationships, inappropriate behaviors, negative mood. Oftentimes the causes are neurological functioning or psychological processing, maladaptations, self-concept, lack of social acceptance, and oftentimes factors affecting families, disrupting the child's security, changes in family structure, physical, mental, sexual abuse, all can be part of causes along with many others. And oftentimes we see a wide range of behaviors in students with emotional and behavioral disorders, and they oftentimes are shown with aggression, withdrawn or immature behavior, or depression, anxiety, etc. Like I said, there are a wide range of behaviors that you can see with students who are suffering from emotional or behavioral disorders. Another disorder that you will come across in your educational or teaching journey, if that's where you're going, would be students with autism spectrum disorder. And this has gone through various changes over the years in the DSM in terms of what we label and how we talk about students with autism spectrum disorder. And I always feel like we are all human beings. We're all somewhere, we could say, I guess, on the spectrum, if you will, at some point, meaning we're all different. We all take in social cues differently. We all express ourselves differently. However, when we're talking about autism specifically, there is a spectrum where we're looking at developmental disability, and it significantly affects social interaction and verbal and nonverbal communication. So students might be withdrawn, have severe difficulties with language, or they might even be mute or not speak at all. They might have some self-stimulating activities such as rocking, flapping their hands, blinking. There are all sorts of different self-stimulating activities that help students self-soothe in different environments. So one of the things that I brought here into our slide is to talk about Asperger's syndrome, because there has been a lot of question regarding if it's being used or not, and it is not. What we used to call Asperger's syndrome is just now on a different end of the autistic spectrum disorder. So we don't use that term. What we say is just perhaps a student might have high functioning autism where they're able to function in society, they can succeed in school, However, they might have significant social problems like avoiding eye contact or misinterpret social cues or behave oddly, but we're not going to be using the term Asperger's syndrome anymore. So just so you know, this is not a term that we use, even though it is oftentimes written in a lot of our literature still, because it wasn't very long that we stopped using that term. So let's look also at the number of cases receiving special education services quadrupled since 2000 to 2001. So that means there are a lot of students who are qualifying for special education under the autism spectrum disorder arena. One of the things that we want to do to help those students, we want to help teach social skills. We want to help self-management of behaviors and possibly use interventions to help students identify various behaviors, various social skills that they should be learning or emulating, and really working with students to help them in those areas. So oftentimes we can see that we'll talk about interventions for children with autism spectrum disorder, because studies have shown that early intervention in autism can be a life-changing circumstance for many young children. Meaning, with early intervention, when you have autism, oftentimes you're able to learn quite a bit in those very young years, so that you are able to work on your social skills. You're able to work on increasing your ability to monitor perhaps some of those self-soothing behaviors. So in this preschool level, a lot of times we can increase joint attention skills by using turn-taking interventions, and then comprehensive preschool interventions where they're targeting specific behaviors, emulating and teaching social skills, communication, and learning. And then for school-age children, oftentimes peer-mediated interventions are helpful, where group interventions with peers support the development of social skills, meaning perhaps in a school-age child, you might bring someone who has been diagnosed with autism into a lunch group with different children who are able to work with, understand, and really just emulate and work on the development of social skills with the autistic child. So social skills are one of those things that we can use with other students and practice good social skills and good behaviors. And we hope that as school-age children learn and want to be included, that they start to emulate and work on various socially acceptable skills. So another thing that you will encounter on your educational teaching journey are students with various sensory, physical, and health impairments, such as blindness, as well as deaf, hard of hearing. There are going to be various health impairments, like I said, sensory and physical, that you will see. And there are assistive technologies to be used in many of these arenas. And this is something you really want to make sure you are working with a special education teacher, or the student might be able to talk to you about what their sensory or physical or health impairment is, and maybe the parents have ideas on how they've been supported in the past. So oftentimes with this, we really want to work as a group and find out what are the resources that we have to help these students, just like we would for any student. Another area of special education, which people don't often think about, are students who are gifted and talented. And this is constituted as students with a superior IQ that's above 130 or demonstrated ability, and superior abilities in a wide range of activities, including the arts. Some characteristics are strong motivation, academically superior, perhaps physically stronger, larger, and maybe better coordinated. Oftentimes acceleration programs like advanced subjects at early ages, and the use of curriculum compacting, where advanced placement courses are broadly available, or you're really taking curriculum and you're really chunking it together. Maybe the students are really taking in that information a lot faster and are able to then go on and perhaps take extra classes, more classes, or just go through the material a lot faster than other students are able to. You want to make sure that students who are demonstrating superior ability and who are identified as gifted and talented are stimulated. We don't want them to be feeling where they're bored or they're just not actively engaged because perhaps the pace is too slow for them. Just like for other students, the pace of teaching might be a little too fast and they need a little extra help or reinforcement. Students who are gifted and talented often might times need a faster paced to feel challenged, as well as enrichment programs and general really exploratory self-learning activities. So what is special education? So Public Law 94-142 prescribed the services that all children who had disabilities must receive. And IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, required a transition plan for students starting at the age of 16. That means that anyone who is receiving special education services in the high school level really needs to have a transition plan that they start working at the age of 16, because it means that students aren't going to be in high school forever. And how does their disability get services as they approach adulthood? What kind of services are needed? What kind of transition plan needs to be created? And those are all the tenets behind the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, encompass. Then we have IDEIA that was implemented in 2004. And this emphasized prevention as well as early intervention. So it also eliminated IQ and achievement discrepancies. It corrected racial disparities in assignments to special education. It coordinated IDEA with No Child Left Behind and required assignment to a least restrictive environment or inclusion. And Table 12.2 in your book summarizes what those provisions were with IDEIA. Oftentimes when you talk about special education, you're going to hear the letters IEP, and perhaps you've already heard them and you're wondering what it stands for. Well, this stands for an individualized education program, or sometimes people will say individualized education plan. So an IEP, or this educational program individualized, is required for each student with a disability. Basically, it's paperwork that is completed during the time of a meeting when you're going over what a student is requiring and how to help provide supports for them. And it's paperwork that's required for each student with a disability and describes their problems. It delineates course of action. It's developed by the Special Services Committee, and law requires that a parent needs to sign this IEP and they need to be kept informed. So evaluations for special education placement conducted by qualified professionals, these take place, and then the specialists come back to the meeting after they've done their evaluations. Perhaps they've had a speech and language evaluation or an occupational therapy evaluation or an IQ, or a school psychologist has done some evaluating, or perhaps we're looking at behaviors and a school psychologist has asked parents and teachers to fill out information about a child's behavior. And then what ends up happening is that these people come together in meetings and they come up with this plan. What's the plan going to be for this student? What do these test results look like? How are we going to best support the student? And that's what is done in a school district. And then for students who are under the age of 3, there are individualized family service plans, or IFSPs. Many of you have probably heard of those already. And those are developed, like I said, for children with special needs who are under the age of 3. And then again, we need to remember that there are a lot of services that are provided by schools that we need to sometimes bring together in order to meet each individual's student's needs. So when we're talking about the IEP, there's various ways that people will do this, or different school districts may do this, different states may do it a little bit differently, but the tenets are pretty much the same, as there is like a pre-referral where a teacher is going to attempt to remediate the problem in the general education setting, but they're also going to notify the family of the status that, hey, you know what, we're looking at so-and-so might be struggling with the area of reading, but we're going to attempt to give a little extra support and see if we can help catch them up. After that, a student would be referred. So perhaps the teacher attempted to remediate the problems, but then they say, you know what, this isn't really working. Let's look and see what's going on. So then they would make a referral for an evaluation, and then the family must agree to let specialists who work in the school district perform that evaluation. The assessment is done. So after that consent is given, the evaluation or the assessment is done, and then the committee meets with the family. And everyone that's completed the assessment, regular education teachers, special education teachers, parents, and sometimes the student, depending on their age, they will meet and they determine if general education is sufficient for the student, or do they need to move on and to write an IEP or have an IEP meeting where they're coming up with an actual intervention plan that they write up and they require the family to consent to that. And then every year, the annual review of the IEP is conducted once a year by family and the special ed professionals. And each time they talk about, okay, what are our next steps? How is the student progressing? Have the interventions that have come in with that IEP or that were suggested in that plan, are those working? So, and then your job as the intentional teacher when dealing with all kinds of students and students who all learn differently, or perhaps have disability or special needs. Some of the tenets in terms of what you'd like to do and what you would like to try to do are really apply effective teaching methods and classroom management skills that you've learned, as well as a means of meeting individual needs. So you're trying to use those effective methods, classroom management skills, teaching, etc., and trying to meet students' individual needs. I'm not saying that it's easy, especially if you have a group of diverse learners, but use and coordinate with your special education teachers and other professionals as supports. You also need to monitor student progress and use your resources effectively. Implement those IEPs. So if you have an IEP that's written, you need to implement those goals and get help from special education staff if you need it. Let others help you. You don't have to do it alone. It's really a team process. Use small groups, different strategies of tutoring, technology, cooperative groups like we talked about earlier in the presentation. Teach learning and study skills. Integrate socially isolated students. Try to bring students you see struggling in certain areas in with a student who possibly would be a great role model or someone that would have a positive influence on that student. And then, for when we're talking about gifted and talented students, use some acceleration methods, use enrichment, have them come up with a different kind of a project, have them take some more self-direction in their learning or do some different kinds of research. So a lot of strategies, a lot of different ways to help a different broad array of students along the road that you're going to meet. So I hope you found this presentation helpful. Be sure to let me know if you've had any questions, and I look forward to hearing from you.